Hi everyone, this is Kelly and I'm here to do a walkthrough of the Divine Muses Oracle. Now this, I've talked about this already with many of you, I think on live chats, also on Instagram. I have really been enjoying this. I've had this for a couple months now. I was a little unsure, I'll be honest. I knew that I was going to like the deck because I had a friend of mine, Larissa, who she has the Bard's Lament on YouTube. She told me that I would love this, that she's gotten really interesting readings from it, and that I should look at it. And then shortly thereafter, the creator of the deck, Marie Bento, contacted me about doing a review of the deck, and so of course I said yes, especially based off of my friend Larissa's recommendation. But one of my concerns was that it is quite a feminine deck in terms of, it's not all feminine, but it has a very divine feminine feel to it, and I don't tend to use those types of decks as much. Nothing wrong with them. I am not at all saying that somebody can't make a complete divine feminine deck. Many people have successfully done so. Many people love them. When I do readings for myself, however, I do tend to really look for a balance of those kinds of energies. And I was a little unsure of whether or not something that was leaning more towards divine feminine would be something that I would find useful in my reading. So I did take time to do readings with this and work with this and read through the book and things of that nature so that I could, give it a good review, given the fact that I don't tend to work with really a lot of the divine feminine. What I have found about this, my first assessment early on stands true by the time now that I've used this for myself quite a bit, and that is that this deck feels like you're diving into the water of the High Priestess. To me, that's what it feels like to me. So I think of the High Priestess card in tarot. She generally has waters at her feet, very moon energy, and very much diving into the depths of those waters where we come back up. That's where the waters of our intuitive power is. That is where the waters of our internal power resides, and where we kind of cross the veil through water to gain those secret mysteries. This deck to me feels like diving into the water of the High Priestess. That's the realm in which it made me think of this. I've been working a lot with the Majestic Earth Tarot, and the Emperor, the Empress, and the Hierophant are the domains. So it's the Empress domain, the Emperor's domain, the Hierophant's domain. I feel like this is the High Priestess's domain. That's the best way that I can sum up the use of this deck versus just doing a walkthrough, is that this feels like the High Priestess's domain. Now, obviously somebody else might come to this and say something completely different, and that's okay, but this is my walkthrough and my review, and that's the best way that I can line this up. It comes with a zipper pouch, one of those padded zipper pouches. I have a couple of these, and I really like them for decks. I'm squishing it because there's like a padding in it. It obviously keeps your decks safe. I have a couple of these pouches I think I purchased to match the Zircus Magi or Magi or whatever that deck is, and I use them for various things, and I quite like them. I think I also have a couple of Lenormand decks in these type of printed bags. So it comes with that. The backing, let's see, this is the opening card, which I always keep separate, and this is just a thank you. I hope you enjoyed the Divine Muses Oracle. Thank you ever so much. Blessed be Marie. So I've just got that kept separately. I don't know about you guys, but when there's extra cards like this, I just face it to the bottom of the deck. That way I can easily just pull that out when I go to do a reading, and there is, there are the cards. I edged the card in, oh my goodness, it's on my Instagram. I want to guess that I edged it in this, which is Tombow 969. I'm 90%, 99% sure that's what I edged it in, because this would have been too dark. And I absolutely love it. I think it looks gorgeous with the front and the back. This would have just been white edges. I'm so sorry. As I said, I've used this deck for a while now, so obviously I've already edged it and done all that kind of stuff, and that was a really great process. Again, I find edging to be a great way to sit with a deck, because you're taking each card and you're going around it and you're edging it sometimes twice. I think I might have gone around this twice, but anyways, every single card you're sitting with, you know, one step at a time, you're sitting with those cards as you edge it. So I did that quite soon after. I don't know if it was the same day, but quite soon after I got it, I did that. So it gave me, again, that time to sit there with each of the cards, which I highly recommend. If you're not somebody who edges, then, you know, do something similar. Just kind of sit with each one. I don't overthink it. I don't look anything up in the book. I'm just sitting with each of the images and the titles and just kind of getting acquainted. And I think that that can be something you can do even if you don't want to edge your decks. But if you do edge your decks, maybe not turning on the television while you do it, although there are times in which I like to do that just to relax. But I tend to like to put on some music, put some candles on, sit and do it, and be mindful about it, because that's when I'm really sitting with each one of the images of the cards. Again, this has nothing to do with the Divine Muses, but I'm just kind of giving you the steps here. I just happened to see that there, so I wanted to mention it. So I'm going to put these actually in a good order, and then we'll come back and talk about everything. Okay, I've made some piles. You know, some decks require piles, and this deck is a deck that requires piles. And it's a way of me talking about this this deck in a way that I think is useful, and it makes sense to my brain. But first, let's talk about the guidebook. But so this is the second walkthrough I've done back to back. The first was a spirit doodle, in which I'm going to say that the guidebook is key. This guidebook is fantastic. I am so impressed with this guidebook, and again, people know that I like guidebooks, and especially with something like this where it's a lot of depth that's there, but it can, depending on the deck, depending on the guidebook, it can either be something that I'm like, that's really neat, that sinks me in to what the creator has intended, and then sometimes, I just reference them every great once in a while. This deck, however, I just love the guidebook. A, there's quotes. I love any kind of quote here. B, beautifully laid out table of contents. Love it. Thank you very much. But C, it's what she has in each one of the things. So let's talk about this for a minute. So this is a chunky, meaty deck, a book. It is 262 pages. She has a great bibliography in the back of things that you might want to look at, things that would have impacted, I'm sure, the information that she has in the guidebook. And it is a wonderful resource. Some things that I have heard of, and some things I have read, some things I haven't heard of, some things that I want to look into. Like, that's a kind of a bibliography that I love to see. This kind of reminds me of like a John Matthews bibliography, which is something I'm really, that says a lot for me. It ends with a quote: "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Without, everything seems discordant. Only within does it coalesce into unity. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes," by Carl Jung. Wonderful. For this deck, I mean, that's like the perfect way to end the guidebook, in my opinion. So let's see what the creator thinks about her deck, right? It says that the Divine Muses Oracle guides the seeker to explore creativity, mysticism, and healings using archetypes, alchemy, and magic. Divine beings and mystical symbols are found throughout. Each card in this deck depicts an archetypal force, whether this is reflecting in you or the person you are reading for. Archetypes are ancient and universal. They reflect reoccurring themes, characters, images, or patterns that exist within the collective unconscious and show up in literature, art, and mythology. She talks about the idea of archetypes being explored by Plato. I know that we put them to Jung all of the time, but they definitely started, and of course I'm sure they were talked about before that, but we can examine, we can take it back to Plato, reinterpreted by Jung. The concept of archetypes show age-old patterns that exist in the psychic part of one's instinct. So she goes on and talks about that, talks about how we can learn much about ourselves through characters and stories because of this idea of archetypes. Each oracle card that you pull for yourself is essentially a piece of your story to be reflected on. Clarissa Pinkola Estes, Jungian psychologist and author of Women Who Runs with the Wolves, believes that stories have potential for healing. And this is a quote from her. "Stories are medicine. They have such power. They do not require that we do, be, act anything. We need only listen. The remedies for repair or reclamation of any lost psychic drive are contained in stories. Stories engender the excitement, sadness, questions, longings, and understandings that spontaneously bring the archetype back to the surface." Yes, love this. And it talks about how it's only exploring a few. There's so many archetypes. Obviously, the concept of what ones am I going to focus on is something a creator of an archetypal deck is going to have to be able to focus on. The collage, so this is a collage deck. The collage pieces in this deck are symbolic creations that actively influence the subconscious mind. Meditation and contemplation stimulate the archetypal forces that the cards represent. So it is a collage deck. So the book separates the Divine Muses cards into 3 sections, although I know you can see I have five piles here. There are 3 sections that we'll talk about in a minute, but it talks obviously about the oracle cards itself, the muses, because the muses are a section in of themselves, and animals and alchemy are also a section of themselves, and this is where it goes through the alchemical process using animals as representations of each phase. This I found fascinating. I love the book Discovery of Witches. I do not like I don't like the TV show as much. Sorry, I know a lot of people do. I don't find there to be a lot of chemistry between the actors in that, but regardless, I love the book. And in that book, there's a lot of talk about alchemy and the processes of alchemy and things of that nature. And so I thought that was really cool. Obviously, that has much more to do with alchemy than the Discovery of Witches, but it made me think of that. And she talks about the creation of the deck, which I think is well worth looking at. She considers each of the cards' process as a practice in magic, intentional work, reflection, and ritual all going together to create the card. I include the Greek Muses of the arts as a tribute to my business's name, Divine Muses. I find that I'm drawn to different expressions of creativity and feel the muses are dancing all around me. She does add in a couple, we'll talk about the muses later. She also goes in and says, look, if the card's definition doesn't resonate with you, use your intuition, right? Use your perception. This is important. I also think that I like to see that she talks about the idea of gender, because obviously I started in that place of gender because it's something that I do watch for, just because it's, again, a personal preference of mine to see that balance. Now, what she is saying here, though, that when she's talking about masculine and feminine, she is not talking about necessarily gender, and that there can be feminine and masculine women, female character people, and there is, because we all have it, and conversely a male can represent feminine and masculine energy as well. So she does talk about that, and she chooses to just use they instead of using he or she when writing about people. And so yeah, so that's the beginning part. Well worth reading. She goes into ways that you can use the cards, ritual, ways to connect with the oracle. She goes to a lot of things, altar items that you could use for the 4 elements, reading with cards, asking questions, shuffling. So if you didn't know anything about working with oracle, I think you have a really good, what do you want to do about reversals? And the way that she does the system, reverse cards that come up in a reading using the Divine Muses Oracle reflect a shadow of the card. And she talks about different ways in which you can get those reversals, drawing cards, oracle spreads and layouts, and so on. She does give you the archetypal cross, which I have done. Creative free. I think this is the only one that I've done. I've done past, present, and future. I didn't know it was in here. I just did that because I do that a lot. This one I definitely did here. Actually, no, that was just part of this. You're doing the past, present, and future, and then you're doing the essence and the shadow. So she has a couple I just generally pull 3 cards with this deck, and then goes into the oracle cards. So we have a full page black and white representation of the card, which I think is wonderful. It's actually larger than the card itself. So it's a little bit taller and a little bit wider than the actual card, so you can really see the image as well. I don't think, for me, because these are really muted tones, even though the color, matters, I find that this gives you plenty of information. She gives you the name. She gives you some keywords. So if you're just looking for that keyword hit, you can grab that keyword, those keywords, if you're in the middle of a reading. She gives you the essence of the card, which is a well written out, quite in-depth look at the essence of each of the cards. She gives you a shadow aspect of the cards itself. And then this is one of my favorite parts, is that there is an in the card. Now in this case, the ancestor card comprises photographs of people from around the world, mid to the late 19th century. But many of the cards show an actual person. So for example, the second card is Astral Ascent with this lovely lady here. And so in the card tells us that the photograph taken in 1921 is one of the American aviator Bessie Coleman. She was the first African American woman to get her pilot's license, as well as the first Native American aviator, since she was also part Cherokee. She was a pioneer in aviation. She moved to France in 1919 to attend flight school, where she learned stunts that she would then bring back to the United States to perform. So many of the cards have actual people, that there is a reason why she chose that person. So it's not just, okay, that's a pretty image. Some of them, it's image based, but a lot of them are based on actual people and what those people contribute to the meaning of astral ascent. Reaching for the stars, discovering who you are, being willing to push yourself out there, exploration, independence, advancing women aviation, advancing African Americans and Native Americans in aviation, and women. Like she perfectly represents like pushing yourself forward. And so it's mindfully chosen to represent the card, and then she gives you that information. So this is my absolute favorite. If there's a person in the card, I always go to check this, because I want to know, is this a person picked intentionally? Who is this? How does that information influence the card? I just love, love, love this section. So that's what we have for each one of the cards. They are alphabetized, and then you have 2 sections. So most of the cards are alphabetized, so it's pretty easy to find them. If it's a muse, which it says right on the card, it's the muse of, there is a section on muses. And then if it's the alchemical This you wouldn't necessarily know until you get used to it, but if you just check in, thankfully, you know, she did a really great job with this. Alphabetized page number, here's all the muses, here's the animals in alchemy. And so then you can find the page numbers to find them. I haven't had any issue finding anybody. Maybe I picked Celestial Union and I went here and said, oh, there's not Celestial Union, so I just know to go back to this one. So it's not been to me any kind of problem to navigate my way through the book, which again is just a treat. Treat. Some books are treats and this is a treat. Okay, so love, love, love. There's nothing that I don't love about that. So let's take a look at the piles that I've made. So these are the cards pretty much in the main deck with some extra piles. There are 4 totems of elements. So the elements are present: totem of fire, totem of air, totem of water, and then totem of earth. This is probably my least favorite card in the deck. I'm not a fan of gnomes. That does not mean there's anything wrong with gnomes. I'm just not a fan of gnomes, and I'm not particularly a fan of a little girl gnome. But you know, all of the things, this isn't meant to be, oh, this is a beautiful image of this little gnome child girl with a beard. It's meant to represent, each of the things in the cards are meant to represent things. And so in that case, it works beautifully. But I do love that there are the 4 elements that are there. So those are part of the regular cards. And then there are some cards that I kind of see as sets, masculine and feminine sets. So I just kind of want to talk about those. I've kind of got them out of order so I can talk about them all together. And then of course we have the alchemical process, and then we have all of the muses, and we'll talk about those separately. So let's go ahead and zoom in on the cards. And I'll probably have to move those ones so they're not sitting there in the corners. So there's no keywords on the card itself. There are just the images and the titles, which does really leave it open for you to do whatever you want and not even pay any attention to the keywords if you don't want to. I love that any deck that has Ancestor card in it. If you know me, you know I work a lot with Ancestor energy, and so that is was another draw. This is before she sent me the deck, but when Larissa had me looking at it, she showed me some of the cards, and I was like, yes, I put it on my wish list. That was like, okay, when I go to buy another Oracle deck, this is going to be the one. Here we have Ancestors as contact, ancestral medicine, epigenetics, and repatterning. And so she has all this. She has quite a bit of information here about DNA and psychogenealogy, and quite interesting to read. She also has the shadow of this card, suggesting ghosts or troubled ancestors. We can carry within us our ancestors' shadows, the emotional issues that were not dealt with in their lifetime. Any unresolved repressed emotions that stemmed from trauma they endured could have been passed down through the generations and may be impacting you. If you are encountering constant obstacles and conflict in your life, ancestral healing may be necessary, especially if you're experiencing unexplained phobias, anxieties, or distress. Talks about some studies about the descendants of Holocaust and this belief that trauma is something that can be inherited, which I definitely believe. My family has anxiety that is definitely generational for at least 3 generations. So all of my siblings hold some degree of stomach anxiety, all of us, and it's a large family. My mother's family siblings, a lot of them did as well, as did her father. And I'm not talking about depression here, but more about anxiety. And I don't know, again, if it goes any further back than that. And so it's something that I have thought about, and I do find it to be really interesting. So Ancestors in Reverse is asking you to break the link of inherited trauma that may be causing the unexplained challenges in your life. But also for me, I think about when we go to the work work of doing that healing, because I don't find time to be so linear, right? I don't see time to be just walking about in a straight line, but loops and cycles and swirls. I actually believe that when we are doing the business of healing ancestral trauma, that also can have an impact on the spirit and the energy of our ancestors as well. So it's a great responsibility, and I think a powerful task to take into account. And we're just, this is what I mean, how this deck for me, it just dives so deep. So Ancestors card. Astral Ascent, we kind of talked about exploration, spiritual journey, independence, and advancement. And again, this is a actual person, which we already talked about. The next card is the Boundaries card, Relations, Self-Care, and Psychic Shields. Again, this is not an actual person, but just to give, because I love this section of in the card. The central image came from a 19th century French chocolate advertisement. The brick wall behind the woman is the metaphor for the boundaries. It's blue, so we're knowing exactly this is a chocolate advertisement. There's a brick wall that represents the boundaries. We have the color blue because the energy is softer and more peaceful. We don't have to be harsh with boundaries, just honest with our self-expression. The moon is connected to the psychic and emotional realms, and the woman's posture seems to indicate the energetic boundaries may be necessary. So you can see how she gives us a lot of information as to why did she choose the components in the collage that she chose. And I just love it when guidebooks do that. I just love it. Okay. Divine Messenger, Conduit, Spirit Signals, Clairvoyance, and Breath. This is an antique photograph featuring a Japanese woman. Again, goes through why are all of these things, the components here, from the feathers, from the hawk, from the person themselves, all of the energy that's at play and why those things are present and how it relates to the meaning of the card. Eternal Student, Teacher Student, Wisdom, Understanding, Inner Voice, Guru Complex. Again, gives you the shadow side. This card, she says, was created to emulate the Tarot's Hierophant card, aka the Magus of the Eternal. Sir Rajendra Singh, I'm sure I'm slaughtering that, the Maharaja of Patiala from 1876 to 1900, sits in as the Eternal Student or Guru. People, his followers or students, stand facing him like the Waite-Smith Hierophant card. The artwork leans towards the shadow definition of the Eternal Student, where spiritual narcissism or religious dogma can be being portrayed, which I think we also see in the Hierophant of Tarot. Now, there's some of the cards that are missing because I'm going to talk about those later, but there is the Great Mother there. This is the Green Goddess, Nature, Plant Medicine, Luck, and Abundance. The Group Mind card, Stronger Together, Movement, and Mob Mentality. So you can see in the keywords, she's giving you both light and shadow of that particular archetype. That we are stronger together, that we can make a lot of changes when we come together, but that we have to be careful of the mob mentality. And again, she talks about she gives the quote from Helen Keller, alone we can do so little, together we can do so much. But then it talks about a good chunk about the shadow aspect of the group mind. Quite a bit is written about the shadow aspect. And then she talks about the photograph depicting 3,000 women walking in solidarity in the Red Cross Parade on September 23rd, 1919 in Honolulu, Hawaii. So you've got so much information and so many ways to go with that. Keeper of Time, Timing, Preference, Presence, Reference Points, and Age. I love a deck that has kindred spirits. I grew up reading Anne of Green Gables. Loved them. She talks about her kindred spirits. I played Anne of Green Gables in my high school play in my senior year. And so connections, friendships, and familiars. Again, she talks about all of the images and that she's used to bring together to make this. And I like that we have dog, cats for familiars, but we also have friendships in terms of women connections and things of that nature. Here we have Lionheart, strength, courage, and loyalty. I've never been a big fan of like collaged animal heads on top of people. This deck, it doesn't really bother me because I know that everything is put in there for a reason. And she talks about it, you know, she gives us quite a lot of detail about it, and so it ends up being really powerful, and I haven't found it to be an issue to me whatsoever. Again, we have some cards that are missing because I am going to talk about them later. The Magical Child for imagination, wonder, joy, and optimism. Mystic Rapture for inspiration, invocation, bliss, and peak experience. And again, because I feel like nearly the same amount of effort is put into the essence and the shadow of the cards, I feel like the deck is very well balanced because it is meant to work with reversals. It is meant to, you know, kind of lean into those energies and see. And then the other thing is as I always say, we should look at, if we pull 3 cards, we should look at both the light and the shadow in that reading at the same time, whether we use reversals or we don't use reversals. Open-mindedness, tolerance, and hospitality with the perfect stranger. We have the Psychic Portal here, Mystical Gateway, Sixth Sense, and the Thinning of the Veils. I don't know if I've gotten this one. The Image of America. I didn't know whether this was a person, and I feel like I've looked at a lot of them, but I don't know that I pulled this. The images of American actress Lillian Russell came from a cabinet card by Napoleon. She is dressed up as a fortune teller for the play The Shazang. I don't know how to pronounce that. I painted stripes of indigo and violet to connect her to the 6th and 7th chakras, third eye and crown respectively. She almost merges into a portal, so she's looking like she's going into a portal. Spirit board and planchette represent tools that can help open the psychic portal. A turquoise shooting star represents a mystical transmission with the universe. Turquoise is the color of the throat chakra, the chakra of communication. So, I mean, again, I could do this every time and say, you know, there's so much there. There's so much there. I've gotten this quite a lot, and I really, this actually makes my, when I flip this over and see this card, I get that feeling that I get when I work with, say, Mary, or I think about my childhood talking to the statue of Mary. We have the Queen of Roses, compassion, love, generosity, and devotion. And the card is Santa Isabel, also known as Elizabeth of Portugal or Elizabeth of Aragon. And she is, she was known to be very religious. She was very devoted. And so there's a lot of devotion and charity that goes in. And of course the roses and the symbols. And all of this to me connects with that sort of Mary energy as well. So I've had a lot of really good experiences with this card. Healing experiences with this card. Reflection, as within, so without. Mirror, also projection. And she talks about, like, she'll give you whatever you admit out into the world is ultimately being reflected back to you. These are the 4 manifestations of this law, and she gives those, like, that which you admire in others, you recognize as existing within yourself. That which you resist and react to strongly in others is sure to be found within yourself. That which you resist and react to in others is something which you are afraid exists within you. And 4, that which you resist in yourself, you will dislike in others. So that is interesting. Although I often can find the opposite. Something that I might resist in myself, I actually end up liking in other people. Like, I am not very confident. I am confident in many ways. So I don't want to, to say that. I'm not super unconfident, but I tend to second guess myself all of the time, and so I resist that sense of confidence in self, and I know where it comes from. I mean, it's learned, but I tend to like to be around really confident people. Anyways, this is not Psychology 101 of my psyche. We see things not as they are, but as we are ourselves, by H.M. Tomlinson. Kind of talks about the shadow. It talks about the woman here, and I just love everything about this. Resonance, harmony, frequency, fondness, and dissonance. Of course, where there's resonance, there's dissonance. We have retreat, with pause, silence, solitude, stillness, and peace. But there is still shadow here, because sometimes you can become reclusive and isolated. I have definitely done some work with this card. That is certainly one of my MOs. It's good to retreat, but at the point in which then you start to isolate or become, putting lots and lots of boundaries and shields up, it can be not as healthy, and it's something I have to work with a lot. Here we have the sacred witch in magic, wisdom, witchcraft, and spiritual practice. I do think of witchcraft as a practice, and so that works for me, because it is that idea of what are you actually doing with your things. So we have that. We have the sea priestess, which reflects sea magic, cleansing, and tidal rhythms. We have the shadow queen here. Inner radar, sensitivity, mystery, and obstacles. The shadow queen can be an intense avatar to work with. She portrays the deep and dark part of our psyche that needs to be faced, a shadow silently lurking in our subconscious. So she goes on and talks about this. She talks about the devil and the judgment card in tarot. And again, it doesn't look at the Shadow Queen as being entirely negative, but it does talk about the Shadow Queen in shadow being sort of running rampant, and not something that is then being helpful, because it could be shaped by pain or fear or other things. And so she goes quite in depth into all of the cards, and I quite find that. What's interesting is that in the card, that section, folks, if you get this deck or have this deck, read this section. Here we have a spirit photo from the late 19th century. Spirit photography was basically a hoax. At the time, photography was mostly still a mystery to the general public. So it goes on and talks about this ghostly figure, but it was a hoax that was being done. And so what a really interesting card to use for the Shadow Queen, which can be an intense, important thing, but it can also run the risk of that sort of devil and being tricked and being pulled in and giving over our power to somebody else to pull a hoax on us. So I think that was interesting. I've written quite a bit about the Sin Eater. I think I have a blog post on it. I think I might have written about it on Instagram. I find the concept of the Sin Eater really powerful. It's the scapegoat. It's the devil made me do it. It's the monster under the bed when the monsters are really right looking in the mirror. So the idea of a Sin Eater is really powerful one for me. When I went to Africa, we were in the middle of the jungle in West Africa, and there was a village. So this is where there were still, this is not in areas which are, big towns and cities. And there was a village that we could hear, there were drumming and things like that going on during the night. And the village leader allowed us, we were working at a blind school, and allowed us to come into the village, but everybody had to leave the village. The people weren't, they didn't want us to interact with the people. But there was at the entrance to the village, there was a little shed, or like a little building that had to do with spirit work, and then there was on a stick, there was a stone that had to do with taking a lot of negative energies, and then eventually it would break. But anyways, that really stuck with me. I was, I was 18, I think, at the time. And that kind of concept of, and even Christ, he bears the sins of the world. This idea of one person bearing on the sins of the rest of the world is really powerful and interesting. And I talk about a short story, I think, in that. But if I can remember, I'll put the blog post entry there. If I forget, just poke me. Anyway, so very powerful card there. I've done some work with that one. Another card that's not there. Spirit. Oh, that's another card that's not there. Sorry, I pulled some cards out. Spirit of home, harmony, family, feng shui, space clearing. Love tree houses. True will. Here, okay, these are all the totems in the book. Sorry, I'm trying to give you some keywords so you can see. Freedom, choice, integrity, and destiny. And this, apparently, I did not know this before this deck, but true will is a term coined by Aleister Crowley, English writer, occultist, and magician who founded Thelema. This card refers to the true self, in which a person acts in accordance with their own destiny and desire. And so she goes on and talks about this in depth, but that was something I didn't know. That's another card I want to talk about later. Another card, another card. I think I have these backwards, yeah. So I love this card here, the World Weaver. I'm big into spider energy for the last couple years, and this idea of the web is really important to me and my worldview. The World Weaver card is about storytelling, wisdom, cause and effect, and patience, which I just think is so powerful. And so I've definitely done some intentional work with this card. And then we have the Wounded Healer, which is amazing. Healing gifts, suffering, and process. The idea of Chiron is that the things that we have been most wounded in are going to become the ways that we can, when we heal them, can be where our strongest strengths. I don't think that's really a way to say it, but you know what I mean. Only the wounded healer can truly heal, she quotes Irvin D. Yalom. And then that brings us to the totems. Again, totem of fire, totem of air, totem of water. Let me go back to the totem. Let's talk about our little gnome that she's not my absolute favorite of the images. And that is purely because I'm not a huge fan of gnomes. The card shows a photo collage of a young girl standing in a garden as our mystical totem of earth. She is a sturdy little being standing in front of a tree grasping a plant. She wears a garden gnome's hat and beard. Her outfit has been painted green to match the color of this magical element. So, I mean, it's just elements of that. So, it's my least favorite, but it's by no means a problem card for me. Okay, so let me zoom out a little bit. So those are the main cards. We'll zoom back in for some more too. But I wanted to, there are a couple sets of gender, male and female, or certainly more gendered sets, I think. And she doesn't necessarily put all these together, so this is just me. But she has the Great Mother here and the Sky Father. She has the Wild Man and the Wild Woman cards. And then she has the Solar Feminine and the Lunar Masculine here. And I quite like this because obviously we normally see, or I would say obviously we normally see the lunar feminine and the solar masculine, and yet there are cultures in which that is reversed, and so I really like that kind of flipping that energy. We still get sort of sky father sun energy here, and we certainly have some, the sea priestess has, in my opinion, that sort of moon water feminine energy, so you still have those intact, but they're just kind of set up a little bit differently, which I like. I know many people don't like to work with binaries that have to do with masculine and feminine. I like to look at it as active and receptive energy, but I like the visual of those types of things, and it's something I do work with, so I do like having those sets. Now, that being said, in terms of actual sort of male and female images, of course that has both. You're going to see in this deck quite a lot more female forms. I don't want to say feminine energy, I guess that wouldn't be correct way, that has both. You're going to see a predominance, or just doesn't have, you know, it doesn't have anything there. But it's not, you know, it's a predominance. We still have some more over here too, where we do have the Raven King, but it's not a, and we have the Lion, which is masculine energy. We do have, I think, one of the Muses being masculine, but predominantly you're going to find female forms in the deck. And so it does, I wouldn't say that it feels feminine as in, because there's strong energy here, but the images are certainly skewed towards the female form, if that makes sense. Just to be clear about that, which is one of the reasons why I was kind of like, but it, you know, dive into the water of the High Priestess and it works beautifully and is amazing. So I wanted to bring that up there. We talked about these. I just left this card out because I love the fact that there is an unknown card. I love this. I know I have another deck that has an unknown card. I couldn't remember what it was off the top of my head, but I love the concept of an unknown card. Let me go find it here, see what she talks about it. You know, sometimes there are just things that are unknown, and that to have that come up in a reading, I think, is really powerful, because sometimes we just don't know. It's not to be seen right now. The not known, the keywords are not known, wait, and unknowable. The unknown card simply says that some things cannot be known. Your question has hit a forbidden area and the answer is being withheld, or the solution is not yet formed. For me, it's like energy just really hasn't coalesced around this topic, or I haven't done some of the work that I need to do to get to that yet, right? If I'm looking at more past things or things of that nature, healing work, I might have some other work before I'm going to get to this. Whatever your inquiry, it's necessary that the information be kept secret right now. This is possibly for your own safety, as the truth might be too much right now. This is temporary, as there will be another opportunity in the future when cards will reveal the answer in another spread. Accept this and move on. Waiting is the only action to be taken. So I quite love that this card is in the deck, and so I wanted to point that out. Absolutely love that. Okay, so I know this is a long, well, I don't know why I say that. People say, stop saying it because we know this. Yes, I know. I start to get, when I look up and I see like 40 minutes and I still have cards, I'm like, ah. So we'll go through these pretty quickly. These are the Muses. I think most people are probably, again, there is a different section for the Muses, but it says right on the card that it's the Muse. And she talks about, gives you some background on the Greek Muses. She also talks about how while we look at certain numbers of Muses and say, oh, there's this many Muses, there are actually different numberings that you can find. Some discuss 3 Muses. Classical writers suggest 9, as opposed by Hesiod, and those are the ones that she's discussing here. Now, I believe she added in, I could be wrong, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. But I think she added in an extra Muse that was missing. As I have read through this book, and I'm trying to remember which one it is. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe 2. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, she's definitely added some in, and she talks about visual arts. She said she's surprised that there wasn't one for visual arts, for like painting and sculpture. So she added that in. And then, which is the Muse of Art, which is just representing visual arts. Maybe that's the only one she added in. Yeah, that might be the only one she added in. So, yeah. So, she also gives you a list of the 9 muses, of what their Greek names are and what they are the muse of. And so yeah, so we have the Muse of Art, visual art, painting, and sculpture. And she talks about, again, the person who's on it, Frida, of course, being on the image of the Muse of Art. The Muse of Astrology for prophecy, stars, and horoscope. So we have that. I love that picture. That image is really cool. We have the Muse of Comedy, comic relief, humor, lighthearted fun. Thalia is, or Talia, I don't know if that you say the TH. And she just likes the presence of this woman here. She does talk about it. And that's who she's used here. We have the Muse of Dance for rhythms and music. And she has Josephine Baker, as she was a famous dancer and singer who was active in Europe from the 1920s to the 1940s. We have the Muse of Eloquence for expressiveness, fluency, the silver tongue. This is a woman sitting with the open book. Here we have the Muse of History, as I think the only only male muse. This is a Portuguese journalist, Joaquim Ribeiro. He was on an antique postcard that I found in Lisbon, and he was a journalist, so that's why she has him on there. We have the Muse of Hymns, sacred music, meditation, and divine connection. I have a young bride here. We have the Muse of Music, singing, playing, sound, healing, the unifier. And this is a Bombay woman, depicts this muse. She sits on a drum playing a veena, which is an ancient Indian instrument. I probably didn't say that correctly. Muse of Poetry, evocation, emotional expression, and verbal rhythm. Of course, we have Emily Dickinson here at the age of 16. And lastly, we have the Muse of Tragedy, catharsis, suffering, and misery. And here, can't remember if this is a person. No, just a shrouded woman. Here for the Muse of Tragedy. So we have, those are the muses. And she does talk about, let me go back here. Again, for each of the muses, she does give you the key, same thing. You get the light and you get the shadow, you get the information in the card. So it makes it, very easy to see how those are playing out in your particular reading. And then lastly, we have the alchemical processes. I think I'm actually going to zoom out here so we can put them in order here. I am not an alchemist. I have always been fascinated with the concept of alchemy, but I am not an expert on it by no means. And she even says, I'm not going to go into comprehensive treatise about alchemy in this book. She gives you some references for that. She talks about how Jung believed that the alchemical process of the ancients was not an actual transformation of lead to gold, but an inner or spiritual work, a metaphor for which he termed the individuation process, or steps to becoming aware of oneself for personal growth. So the alchemy cards here, while they follow the steps of classical alchemy, are talking about that inner alchemy that, of course, this deck references. So we have the Raven King, who represents the blackening stage of alchemy with the raven. We have the lattice of the soul, which references the whitening part of alchemy with the deer skeleton. We have the cosmic prince, which is the iridescent, and this is associated with the peacock, obviously. We have the celestial union, or the yellowing that takes place. And this, I know this is probably not the best way to show these, but that's okay. This represents humans. We have the ultima materia, or the reddening, which is represented by the lion. And we have the totality and infinity, which is representing cycles and rebirth, which is represented here by the Ouroboros, of course. And she does go in and give you some of the steps here and how, but it is not, meant to teach you about alchemy, but more to talk about the steps of individuation. And so that is something I have not spent a lot of time working with this, or really thinking about these. I have had Raven King come up a couple times, as well as the Ultima Materia, but I haven't spent a lot of time studying with this aspect of the deck. But there, in terms of just the cards coming up, I haven't had any issue working with them any differently than the rest of the cards, despite not being an expert on alchemy. So there you have it. That is a look at the Divine Muses cards. I think, or I hope, that if nothing else, you can certainly see that a lot of effort and mindfulness and intention went into both the cards, which cards are in here, but also in what each individual aspect of the collages themselves represent. And that is all, it's not done just for visual looks, looks matter, right? So I'm sure, aspects of creativity went into making things look visually pleasing and all of that, but each thing has a reason for being there, and she gives you the reason, which is, in my opinion, a big bonus. The cardstock is a linen, it's like a linen playing cardstock, nice linen. It's shuffle, as you can see, it riffle shuffles really beautifully. So it is like a linen cardstock, plain cardstock. It has that really good ruffle. It just feels good in hand. It's not a super thick kind of cardstock, that you might see in like the first edition Wild Unknown. It's not that thick. It's definitely more like you might find in Pagan Otherworlds, where they use really good linen cardstock, playing cardstock, which shuffles very beautifully. So, and then of course the back, which is gorgeous, and then of course I did the sides, so there you go. All right, so let's just pull some cards. I have not done anything other than, I think I did do the one with past, present, and future. I've used this deck a lot for healing work for me personally, as well as some ancestral work. Again, think of diving into the waters of the High Priestess and bringing things up. So for the most part, I have just pulled 3 cards, sometimes just 2 cards, but 2 to 3 cards is what I've generally pulled. And in that case, the way that I would pull is, and again, if you want to use reversals, you could use reversals. Although I think the whole deck is reversed, so that's not. I don't tend to, you know me, I don't tend to use reversals. Oops, I do need this card though. I tend to say that we should be looking at both and at the position. So if I'm doing a reading on what do I need to heal to bring about healing, then I might look to the earth in the past. There is some degree of grounding and getting my feet solid on the earth that I might need in order in the past, so that I can find healing, you know, go through the true will in the present. And going into the future, we have this beautiful energy of the green goddess of abundance, nature, really delving into plant work, you know, things like that. And then I think she has, let me see the 5. Let's just see what her spread was over here. I know 1 is the shadow. Yeah, so then you might have shadow below, which is reflection, so then I would really work with the shadow aspect of that card. And then on the light side, or the essence, she calls the light side, she calls it essence and shadow, not light and shadow, but you know, it'll be similar. So this essence of astral ascent, this card comes up for me a lot. I've been doing a lot of work with that one as well. And then this idea of reflection as the shadow. I have done this reading, but for the most part, I just pull 3 cards. And to me, because I really do like to dive into the guidebook on this one, that has been more than enough to get information to work with, because then I find I want to sit with that energy for a while, and then maybe a week or 2 later I'll pull another 3, because I've been doing more specific like energy. So for example, if I was going to be working on grief, I might do a specific 3-card reading on grief, sit with those answers, sit with the energy of that for a week, then pull another 3 on the same topic. But okay, I've kind of processed this, so now how can I, the next step deeper, what am I need to now focus on? And I've kind of been doing that with this deck, where I've been stepping through topics. So like the idea of ancestral healing, start you know, working my way below. But rather than doing like a 9-card reading, I've been doing 3 cards, coming back and doing another 3 cards, and building it that way. That just seems to be how I've worked with this deck. So that's all I can obviously give my personal experience with how I've been using it. Obviously, you can do what you please, so to speak, with this deck. So all right, I'm going to stop babbling. Thank you for taking the time to listen. And I hope that this helps you in some way, even just out of interest of this topic and this type of deck, whether or not this is ever a deck that you decide is for you or not.